So the other day, there we were, just minding our own business, doing some scouting, and we came across something rather interesting, and I'm here to share it with you. One of the issues you'll find in your first few seasons of a save, especially in a smaller nation where you're heavily cash-strapped and relying a lot on the money you get from those early qualifying rounds of European competitions, is finding high-quality youngsters that you can bring through and sell for a profit, especially when your budget is probably, well, zero. Let's be honest, it's zero. Originally, this video was just going to be me showing you some leagues that you could find abnormally high-quality players in. However, over the course of the last couple of weeks of streaming, while writing this, we've begun to find some very interesting things. So today, you're pretty much getting 3 videos for the price of 1. Never let it be said I don't give you good value. Firstly, the recruitment focus that we use that accidentally allowed us to stumble into this beautiful rabbit hole, and how it can help you find some players completely outside of the rest of this method. Secondly, the country it led us to, and the quirk in the game that seems to produce outrageously good players that you can hoover up completely for free. And lastly, the juicy bit, the scouting filter that lets you bypass all the busy work and cut straight to the good stuff to, in theory, now make this work for any nation in the game, within reason. For now, we're going to start at the beginning, as this has been absolutely potent for me on my MTK Budapest save, where you can find me live on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays over on Twitch, of course, so drop a follow there. But now back to the story. This all started as we were playing about with recruitment focuses, trying to find some combination of commands that would actually get them to bring us players worth looking at, that even vaguely fit our requirements. This was mostly a failure, but that is a story for another video. Eventually, we settled on an extremely vague one to look for players in any position between the ages of 15 and 17 that had minimum potential ability of only 3 stars. This was to account for all the white stars that don't seem to get taken into account when calculating this. That's when your scouts don't really know a lot about the player yet, and it will take some time to filter that through. This will at least allow you more players to come through your reports, thus you can form your own judgments on them and just have a look through more players. At some point, I do plan to do a proper deep dive into recruitment focuses, but today is very much not that day. After a while, we did start to get some reports through. Obviously, this is not from the time that happened in the save. This is my current setup, but it is the same recruitment focus, and you can see that it does seem to find some reasonable quality players. Most of them, however, are going to be massively out of our price range, and thus it does seem a bit useless. You can still find some good players with this though, so I would recommend it as like a base set of scouting for young players. In amongst all that, there were a couple of very interesting high current ability and high potential players that were completely free. They still had clubs, but they were on amateur or non-contract deals at those clubs. After signing a couple of these players through the scouting reports and feeling jolly pleased with ourselves, we began to notice a very interesting pattern. All of them came from Belgian clubs. Even the ones that weren't Belgian. And even weirder than that is that at the time of us signing them, they were almost always the only proper player that was even at those clubs. All the players you're seeing are actually regions. I just have the Nugan face pack, so that's why this is interesting. They often had surprisingly high current ability stars for their age as well. This guy's a slight exception in that we did actually have to pay 22 grand for him, but again, it was a Belgian side, and he's already a Greek international now. We then noticed that almost all of them had some form of youth national team caps, mostly for Belgium, but there were some from other nationalities too. This is where things got really interesting. With a couple of tweaks to my national team scouting view, we were able to add a contract type and noticed that there was an awful lot of non-contract and amateur players amongst the Belgian underage national team sides, as you can see here in the under-19s, a couple in these ones as well. There's an amateur chap there, even up as far as the under-21s occasionally. There were even some in the under-21s, but you'll notice that there's a lot of players for MTK, so Novak, Osei, Moores, Heremans, these are all guys that were in here, but we signed them and now they're on pro deals, but they were all on non-contract deals up to this point whilst in the under-21 squad. This guy here, Marius Heremans, is a player we literally found while I was explaining this concept to someone on stream. I know how powerful scouting the youth national teams can be. Most of you that watch my content will have probably already seen my video about this exact method, given that it's the most popular video I've ever had on my channel. But this is something quite different. Due to these contracts, these players can be picked up 100% for free on very low wages most of the time. And given that the clubs that they're at are usually very low rep and the player's world rep isn't usually that high, they will join surprisingly small sides as well, which is where you come in and have the advantage. We picked up a whole raft of these guys for my MTK side, as you've already seen. We'd only just won the league title in Hungary for the first time in the save, and we're only playing in the Conference League for the very first time that season. And it isn't just good players for the future either. The likes of Novak and Moores and Heremans all came in to be starting 11 quality players for us, which is really saying something. Now, is this going to be effective if you're managing a European giant? No. But then the other method that I talked about earlier is probably way more effective for you than this. This is more for your cash-strapped clubs and the smaller sides. Before we go any further, a word of warning. If you have Belgium loaded as a playable league, this is most likely not going to work, or at the very least, it will severely reduce the number of players you find. For the best results, it seems that you're going to want to have the players loaded, but not the league. I'm going to make a separate video about that exact thing in advanced database setups next week, but for the moment, it's just an advanced database setup, basically. There is an old video on my second channel, which I'll link in the description, that kind of goes into that stuff, so I'll link that too. But a normal save with a large database will still produce plenty of these players, just maybe in slightly smaller numbers than what you're going to see specifically today. Belgium is far from the only nation that this works for. It just seems to occur here in the highest frequency for some reason. So even if you don't have the optimal database setup for this, you should still find plenty of players to suit your needs. These are just a taste of some of the players that we've acquired over the last 18 months of scouting simply by looking through some of these squads for these types of contracts. But I also have a brand new fresh save setup that's got a similar database setup as well as simmed 3 years into the future to allow the players to actually come in, that we're going to take a look at later and see if we can find some brand new ones to prove my point. So why does this happen? Most of these players are generating at sides that you would not expect to produce players of this kind of quality. To give you an idea, Felipe Novak, one of the Belgians I showed you at the start, came through at a side who have similar youth facilities and recruitment and stuff to York City, and another that came through at a club who could be better compared to a club like Dulwich Hamlet. And due to them often being the only player at their club, they're thrown into first team football at an incredibly early age, and that's part of the reason why they've often got 60 to 100 senior appearances by the age of 18, and also part of the reason why they've developed so strongly and potentially have such high CA to begin with. Originally, my plan here was to give you a list of some nations that you could look through the squads for and find some good players in. However, we've got a little bit more creative than that and actually built a scouting filter that will allow you to just zero in exactly on these players from the start, and in theory should let you find them for any nation, including players that are not yet in those under 19 and below national team squads. And this, my friends, is it. You'll find a link in the description to download the exact filter that I'm using, and you can import this yourself, or you could just copy it off the screen right now. Should you want to download it, you put it in the filters folder, you hit this cog, you go to manage filters, you go to import, you'll find it in your list here as non-contracts, you load it like that, you then hit OK, and it should show up in this little list down here. It might ask you to save your current one, don't worry about that, and it should still load up in here like so. Firstly, it filters out any player who has not yet made 25 senior appearances. This is mostly just to deal with the numbers. You can tweak this to your own taste, but for me, having 110,000 players in my database, this gave us a good way of filtering through that. Next, we have it to show players only between the ages of 15 and 19. This is mostly so that you can get the players when they're slightly younger and they'll still be available for these squads. In addition, it will allow you to maybe have them be homegrown for you for European competitions in a few years, if you get them young enough. Next, we have two different types of contract status modifiers, one for non-contract and one for amateur. We've got an OR in here, that way both of these will show up in the filter. Last of the important things is we have a knowledge filter that is set to none. That way, you're only going to see players that you don't already know about, and that way it will allow you to filter through the list a little bit faster. It's also the reason why the potential ability and current ability stars are hidden from the main view, because you don't know that information and it just takes up stuff from the screen that you don't need. And lastly, we have a based in nation filter. This will just allow you to zero in and target players in certain nations that you might want to have a look at, be it ones with high youth rating or just ones you're interested in. Given that if I turn this off, in our database we have 7,500 players that meet all the other requirements, this is just a way of filtering through and going to nations that actually will have high quality players for you. So just taking Belgium for example, as they are the originators of this, if we apply those filters to Belgium, currently we get 16 players show up that are all on amateur or non-contract bases. Now were I doing this fresh, there'd be a hell of a lot more of course, because we've already signed a load of the players and we've already scouted a load of the other players, so actually it'd be more likely 40 or 50 players that would show up for you. Now the view that we're using here is extremely useful, as it's going to allow us to do a lot of the scouting stuff without actually ever leaving this screen. If you want this view, of course, it will be linked in the description along with everything else. Download it, pop it in the views folder, which you should be seeing on screen right now, go into custom, hit import view, hit amateur final, load, bish bash bosh, done. I know I always explain that stuff in almost every video, but if I don't, I will get comments about it. It has your basic stuff like your player name and the world rep and stuff like that, but it also has the number of appearances they've made in their career so far. This is useful when filtering through big lists of players, just to find a guy that's played a hell of a lot, probably going to develop somewhat in that time if he's got that kind of quality. It also has 3 different sections of attributes. Now, even those of you that watch the streams will have not seen this part yet. So basically what I've done is I've separated it into important attributes for technical, mental, and physical attributes. I've still left a few of them out, so set piece related stuff here I don't think is that important to begin with, and the same with this, there's a few things missing, and the same with this one as well, but it allows us to save space on the screen whilst giving you a lovely overview of each player without leaving this screen. The amount of information you have on some of these players will vary massively from nation to nation depending on your scouting knowledge. For reference, the reason I have my attribute colors set as red, yellow, green, and then blue for the very highest ones, is so that when I'm scrolling through large lists of players, I can just look for clumps of colour that I sort of recognise as being good, and it'll allow me to zero in on certain players to take a closer look at. It just speeds things up slightly. So I'd advise going through, picking several different nations, or as many as you bloody well like, honestly, finding any players that you think look slightly interesting. Of course, your scouting knowledge will vary. Any players you like, add them to a brand new shortlist. Call it whatever you like. There's a reason for that. When you've done that, you should find yourself a screen just like this, except without the scouting knowledge. At this point, select a load of them and offer trials to as many of them as you physically can. This can be done in groups of 30. Most of them and their clubs will say no, but any that do will just save you some scouting time, and you can not have to worry about sending scouts out to look at them because they'll be here with you. After that stage is complete, take all the rest of the lads that you've got on this list, select a big chunk of them, and then go through the list and hit get scout report. So you're getting scout reports on every single one of those players. The current state of this screen you're seeing right now is actually with most of the scouting already done. There's a few guys that are still in a little bit of progress, but for the most part, they're pretty extensive in their knowledge. But you can see from the list of players that there's a nice batch of potentially quite high potential players, as well as some quite high CA guys, which is not a surprise at all. Just to give you a couple of examples of some of the players that you can sort of see than this kind of scouting method. Not all of them are going to be absolutely perfect, but sometimes you're just going to find if he was quicker, he'd be absolutely genius. This chap here is Belgian, but he hasn't actually got into any of those squads, and yet I'd say would still be a very interesting prospect for a lot of teams. And even some guys that might not have the highest potential ability could still very much be worth a look if you look at some of the attributes that you get on some of these guys, and could very well do a hell of a job for you, bearing in mind they're all free. It's worth noting that we'd already hoovered up a lot of the most talented players doing this the hard way before we developed these filters, so you will probably see more quality players on this screen the first time that you do it, depending on RNG and database optimization. Do you get a general idea of what I'm talking about? But now I want to switch gears into my other save that we've got completely fresh, so I can have a look and see if we can find some more players like this. So this is a brand new fresh save. It's been simmed 4 years into the future. It's got Denmark as the main league loaded for this one, just to give us a bit of variation on it, to show that it can work all over the place. And it has attribute masking turned off, that way you can actually see the attributes of the players, because some of them I hadn't got fully scouted there. So if we now go over to player search, and we can actually import the filter directly from here, because this is how you're going to have to do it. You go to non-contracts like that, drop it in, hit that, hit OK, then it's down there like that, boom, and then you just hit no, and then it should appear like that. Just go off of that and then come back in, and then it will show Belgium. Since we're doing most of this based on Belgium, we may as well start with Belgium. First thing I'm going to do is filter by the number of appearances that they have made, and now we can actually see a better idea of some of those players' attributes. And I would just look for clumps of interesting colours, take a little look at some of the players that are available here. There's definitely some players that sort of, this guy looks kind of interesting actually, Matthias Stevens, some really good physicals and quality mentals on him. Oh, now we're talking. Roberto Solis, a Filipino international that's playing for Lira Lies. 89 appearances for the club, still on an amateur contract, finishing, solid composure, okay physical. He's a solid option with 16 passing as well, good on both feet. Oh my god. This guy's wow. This is Willem Verbroek. This guy's better than any of the ones we found on our save. Jesus. 18 pace, 17 acceleration, 18 aggression, 15 finishing, decent composure, good first touch, reasonable left foot on him as well, 61 appearances, and he's only 19 years old. He's completely for free. Another guy here is quite a limited striker, but still kind of interesting, and in the lower leagues could still be very, very good. And this is just with looking at Belgium, bear in mind. You could look at this for other countries too, and surely would find some quality. France is always going to be a lot of players, so you're going to have to trawl through this a little bit to find the quality, but there's definitely players in here that will be high quality. Here you go, centre back Rennie Duquesne, 6 foot tall, but 15 jumping reach, 16 tackling, 11 marking, and 13 heading. Not the quickest, but still solid on the physicals and mentals as well. Only 19 free. Another guy here, free Norwegian winger, 14 crossing, 14 dribbling. He's got decent physicals, very aggressive again, solid left foot as well. 6'4" on top of that, despite having 14 acceleration and 13 pace. These are all free, but you get the idea. Now, obviously, the wider your scouting range, the more players you're going to have access to. And I'd say, honestly, if you can stretch your budget for one day to switch to World, you might be able to see all these other extra players. And there might be a few guys in there that might be worth taking a zero scout punt on, because potentially they could be your very next wonder kid, completely for free. So hopefully this has been helpful to you in some way. If it has, like. If you're new to the channel, subscribe. And happy amateur hour, I suppose.